Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It is your local community radio station. My name is Andy, and we are broadcasting on Yagra and Turrbal Country. And today on the show, we're going to be talking about photojournalism as a medium of trying to make the world a better place. We're coinciding with the end, unfortunately, of an exhibition that's been running at the Griffith Art Museum. On Sunday, there is a panel discussion, and today on the show, we will be getting a little preview of the panel discussion, actually, by having three of the speakers on the Paradigm Shift today. It's a mini panel discussion on your radio. The exhibition is the photos of Tim Page. It's called The Very Edge of the Brightest Light, and it's about Tim Page's history of going to conflict zones and not only taking the big flashy shots, but trying to capture the human impact of conflict even after the war has moved on. And so it's a really interesting exhibition. And today on the show, we will be hearing from Miriam Deprez, who is a photojournalist and an academic. We'll hear from Samid Suliman, who is an academic in migration security in the School of Humanities. And we'll also hear from Barat Ali Batoor, who is a photographer and filmmaker who made a documentary called Batoor, A Refugee Journey, which won some awards and things like that. And so it's an interesting three different perspectives on the act of trying to capture on film something which can spark some change in the world. And of course, we've all seen a lot of photos in our lives, and some of us have probably at times been particularly moved by photographs that we have seen of places we've never been and people that we've never met. But of course, the question we want to talk about today on the show is, how does that translate into somehow making a better world for all of us, including the subjects of those photos? So that is what's coming up. We might start off with my interview with Miriam Deprez.
So I'm Miriam. I'm a research fellow at Griffith University. So I work for this beacon called the Disrupting Violence Beacon. And I did my PhD at Griffith, and that was all about photography and how Palestine and Kashmir are kind of visually represented, and then how they resist military occupation through photography as well. But also, I come from a background of journalism and being a photojournalist. So I lived and worked in Palestine for a while, as an editor and a journalist there. And I've also worked in different settings. So I've done a lot of research and photography around the Pacific Islands, looking at World War II bombs that are still impacting communities. And I also I volunteer for an NGO called Safe Ground. And we look at kind of documenting and reducing the impacts of bombs and UXO and kind of legacies of war, but also looking at emerging technologies like killer robots and stuff. And that's me, yeah.
So we are talking photojournalism today, and I guess you're just given some examples of different ways that it's entwined in political action and I guess contests of power. I'm interested in your thoughts about what is the strengths, what's the role of photojournalism as a political practice?
Yeah, good question. It's a really important question, and it's a question that even photojournalists and photographers have these huge debates in, of whether it's a powerful tool for understanding and documenting crimes and, being able to visibilize things that we can't get to. But then there's another side of the debate which says, too much photography and we become desensitized and we lose kind of the drive to be active because we become very saturated by these photos of war and atrocities. I'm in the camp where it does good things. I'm in the camp where we need to see things and we need to bear witness to atrocities. And I guess it can bring these back to debates around Gaza at the moment. A lot of people are saying, the photos that are coming out, they're not doing anything. The atrocities are still happening. Gaza's still, there's no ceasefire. Obviously, genocide's still unfolding, and it's one of the most live-streamed genocides of our time. But then on the flip side, I would argue that because it has been so live-streamed, I have been active for Palestine for a long time, having lived and worked there. And I've never seen activism like this. Like, I've never seen a sustained drive to hold, our government account to, our connection to Israel, sending weapons components, diplomatic cover. We're out on the streets almost every week. There's a huge activist community. Students who have no real connection to Palestine are, they were camping out in universities. They were shutting down weapons manufacturers in Brisbane and all around the world too, shutting down entire cities. And I reckon that is because we are being able to see these places and we can react to it. And as people, we are able to take these images and turn it into activism in whatever way we can. I reckon that is a direct response because of the images that we have seen coming out. So that's how I see photojournalism, as political action and a role in that power. It's something that we can do as just people. We can see stuff and we can choose to act or not.
You mentioned that you studied Palestine and Kashmir as part of your PhD. I guess, do you want to share with us specific dynamics of how photojournalism or visual representation, how it works in those two contexts?
Yeah, so my research about these two places began because I found them photographically very similar in what was being represented about these two places. I've never been to Kashmir, but I lived in Palestine. But the images were just of, very militarized streets, kids throwing stones, and they were kind of visually represented in these sort of reductive tropes of, well, these are just, very militarized, dangerous places, don't go there. Also, how the media in the global north represents, brown Muslim bodies as terrorist often. And so what was visually striking was how much these places resemble each other. And then when you dig into the history of it, they have a long colonial history of, British imperialism, arbitrary lines drawn to divide places into different countries. And then, putting them in the hands of kind of neo-colonial occupiers. And they haven't been given the right to self-determination. So that right to self-determination has also been played out in how they're visually represented as well. They've kind of been not allowed to visually represent themselves in a way, or when they do become narrators of their own stories, we dismiss them. We don't believe their stories. We don't believe their testimony, their photographs coming out of these places. So there was a big kind of disconnect in what we see, again, as like audiences of Australia or the global north compared to what the stories coming out of these places are. Usually it's from a Western journalist going in, taking photos and leaving, and kind of hyper-saturating these places as violent. And so my PhD tries to understand how these places can be visualized through the everyday, so slow violence in the everyday, and these smaller moments of joy or everyday life or just getting on with things. And so I use photo voice, which is a technique where participants just kind of take photos themselves of what they want to represent. And so that was what my PhD was about. So it was kind of looking at how we can see the slow amid the spectacular, because we live in, again, a world full of spectacular imagery. And by that I mean, very, very almost like stereotypical sharp images that try and give us everything in one go. And my thesis tries to unpack that and go, we need to slow this down. As audiences, we need to slow down our witnessing as well and kind of take in more stories and be able to look deeper into uncovering these places beyond the kind of visual headlines of they're just violent. So yeah, that was what my PhD was about.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing with photos, I guess, particularly in our era now of, social media scrolls, and we see so many photos, but in a very quick way. A photo always, it depicts something, but it's only what's in the frame at that moment. There's a lot that a photo doesn't show, and I guess is that something that a photojournalist has to grapple with.
Yeah, definitely. Again, this is a big question in photojournalism, especially when you take the photo and then it goes through lots of different processes of, what the editor wants to publish, how does it go with the headline or this news story, or what's the context of it. But I think in this world, again, we have everything just on our phones, and even I am guilty of scrolling on my Instagram feed, and it's just, recipes of vegetarian food, and then there's a photo of Gaza, and then it clicks to like someone doing their makeup. And so I can see how we become so attuned to these instant moments of visibility, and therefore it's really tough to kind of slow down and look beyond the frame as well. But in that, I think these moments are important. When we do have the moment to slow down and take it in, hopefully something in that kind of makes us go, oh, I'd like to slow down and connect with that. And then we look to maybe other photographers, or we do another little deep dive into something. So I do think these moments, again, it's also the responsibility of us as viewers to kind of think, we've been given this very spectacular, violent image, again, perhaps of Gaza or the West Bank. And so that plays a role in documenting this violence. And unfortunately, we do consume it really quickly. But I think there's still power in it being there that gives us a chance to slow down and then look towards, what's going on here? How do I look beyond the headlines? So I think this like tension between, this slow and spectacular imagery works well together. You have to have these spectacular images to draw our attention to what's happening. And then you need the slow kind of storytelling to humanize everything and make us kind of, understand it in a deeper way. And again, that just changes it calls for audiences to reassess our responsibility as witnesses as well. And it's not going to change everything overnight, but I think there's a huge role that photography still plays.
Do you want to talk about what you do with SafeGround, and if it does, how photography plays into that work?
Yeah, so SafeGround is a little NGO that is run by a bunch of volunteers, and it started out as a key member of the international campaign to ban landmines back in the late 90s. So they were co-recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize in 97. And then they went on to help participate in the Convention on Cluster Munitions Treaty, and then other treaties along the way. But their main method of delivering their advocacy message was through photography. So the original, member of Safe Ground is this guy called John Rodstead, and so he was a war photographer, and he spent a lot of time through Lebanon, Afghanistan, in former Yugoslavia, and so he would document the legacies of landmines. And so the photography part was very instrumental in creating awareness for the destruction of these weapons. And so that was really instrumental in getting the landmine treaty signed in 1997. So what we do today is we still use photography to really assist in our advocacy. So we have a few main projects, and one of them is, I think I mentioned before, in the Pacific Islands. So we've been out there a few times photographing, working alongside NGOs and demining teams, but mainly to photograph the impacts of what, bombs that have been rusting in the tropical heat for over 78 years has on the local population. And so, there's a lot of areas that are so contaminated that you can't build, or you can't put in any infrastructure, because as soon as you dig, you could hit a bomb and blow yourself up. And this happens. Or a lot of people use the weapons, they cut them open, they scoop out the TNT, and they use that for dynamite fishing. Or, there might be a family, and the most common way that people injure themselves is they have like a barbecue fire on the ground, but they don't realize that there is weapons underneath. So we try to go out, take photos, we publish books, we have exhibitions, we then go to the UN, and we also we advocate with diplomats, other NGOs. We go to, the Convention on Conventional Weapons, and we try and create conversation just to get other NGOs and countries involved in trying to clear these lands. So, so that's been really important. And then the other recent project that we've been working on is actually in Australia, in the Woomera prohibited area in the South Australian desert. So some of your listeners might know that Australia has the world's largest weapons testing range in the world. But then a lot of your listeners might not know that. So whenever I talk to people, it's really split. Some people have no idea that we have this in the South Australian desert. It's a landmass the size of England, and we test weapons there. And that's where we tested the Maralinga atomic bombs back in the 50s and 60s on the far western reaches. But where we are working is on the eastern side, near the town of Woomera. And we've been working with traditional owners there to photograph and document really ancient petroglyph engraving sites, which are also in this red zone. They call it the red zone of the Woomera prohibited area, where they test weapons daily. So so the WPA have massive weapons testing there. They were a big rocket testing facility in the 70s as well. It was kind of second to Cape Canaveral in the world for space shuttles, sending them into space. And now we test mainly drones and other rockets and different weapons. So there are these competing kind of tensions on this land, and we want to go out there and document these petroglyph sites and protect them, and also work with defence in keeping these places safe. And also some of the traditional owners, they take us to places that, they think there might be petroglyph sites, but they're not recorded. So we go out there and just try and, boots on the ground, trying to find these engravings. And sometimes we do, and sometimes they're places that have never been documented before. So having that, photographic evidence is also really important to be able to protect these sites and have that visual evidence alongside obviously the traditional owners' own knowledge and of these areas, to kind of make sure that they're protected and they stay safe. So that's safe ground.
All right, thanks very much, Miriam, for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me.
On 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. We've just been speaking with Miriam Deprez about photojournalism and her practices, and I have another little interview with Samid Suliman. Let's have a listen to Samid.
My name is Samid Suliman. I'm a senior lecturer at Griffith University in the School of Humanities, Languages and Social Science.
And we're talking to you today because you're part of an event on Sunday linked to photojournalism, particularly that of Tim Page, but there's a sort of conference going on, there's some chats, and so to start off with, I thought I'd ask, in your view, what does photojournalism contribute to sort of the attempts to try to make a better world?
That's a big question to start off with. Look, photojournalism, I think, even in the age of AI and free-floating digital images, still serves a really important role in, I suppose, in what we might call the act of witnessing, in order to bring events and the more invisible structures that lie behind those events into view to publics, in order to make visible and make present the ongoing inequalities and violence in the world. Now, obviously, photojournalism plays a lot of different roles. It may have a documentary function, it may have an entertainment function, but I think it also plays a really important role in creating and sustaining the conditions in which we can understand ourselves as being a connected whole in a wider community beyond ourselves.
Your own field of study is a lot to do with refugees and movement across borders, and it is an interesting one because in some ways it's kind of the iconic photojournalism moment, these kind of shots of desperation and poverty that we associate with refugees. What role do you think it plays in that context, for good and bad?
So I think it's really important to bring into the light and bring to light the forms of exclusion and violence that sit on the very edge of our political communities and our political systems. I think a lot of things that happen at the border, if I can use that very broad term, are largely invisible within both a media sense, but also in terms of a political sense, those things that we register as being politically salient. And I think photojournalism at its best, or its most important, brings those forms of exclusion and violence that that happen at borders into view. And obviously, a lot of things that happen in refugee governments are intended to be largely concealed from public scrutiny. So I think photojournalism can play a really important role in bringing those to light.
There's various ways that those with power try to do that kind of concealing. I suppose there's from hard censorship of imprisoning journalists and things like that, or physically harming them, to more moderate censorship, or even in wartime kind of embedded journalism and things like that. How does that work? I guess the dynamics of power and the attempt to do that kind of revealing the unseen.
I think, you're absolutely right that power constructs we might call regimes of visibility that operate in a whole range of different ways, largely in our contemporary society through media, through organised media. We might call both the mainstream media, but also the digital media platforms through which we are exposed and circulate images. Photojournalism can, and it doesn't always, but it can carve out a new space within those dominant systems. Sometimes those spaces are fragmentary and fleeting, but I think ultimately play a really important role in disrupting what the French philosopher Jacques Rancière called the distribution of the sensible, the established systems of representations and meaning that make up the shared common sense that underpin political communities. And photojournalism has the potential, if not always follows through, but has the potential to interrupt that, to show, again, to draw on Rancière, what he calls the part that has no part, that part that's excluded. Now, that might seem very abstract, but I think what photojournalism has the power to do is to make visible and draw forms of violence and suffering and inequality and exclusion into, I guess, view in ways that make us question or at least challenge dominant ways of seeing within society.
Now, you briefly mentioned it earlier on, but we're in an interesting stage for photojournalism, and in some ways we're a more visual culture than we were, say, 20 years ago with the amount of photos and videos that we see on our screens. But there's also, this worry now about AI deepfakes and things like that, and even just the overload of seeing these endless scrolls of images. How do you think in that kind of scene, how can photojournalism continue to do its role in kind of these critiquing structures of power?
Yeah, really good question. I think it has its work cut out for it in this kind of proliferating ecology of images where we are starting to lose, I guess, the faith and trust in the authenticity of the image that was attached, not unproblematically and not in an uncontested way to photographic images for largely through the 20th century. But certainly with the advent of digital technologies in image making, and more recently the proliferation of generative AI in image making processes, we've started to get a slippery hold on what makes an image any claim to truth. But I think what photojournalism has the capacity to do is to assert itself as an authoritative and ethical assemblage of image-making practices. And what I mean by that is that, and I'll refer your listeners to the wonderful exhibition essay that was written by my colleague, Dr. Miriam Deprez, who writes very clearly about photography as an ethical space, one that is always established in relation between the photographer, the subject, the image, and the audience. And I think as part of that as well, the apparatus and the technology that's used to produce the image. So I suppose the great potential of photojournalism is to constantly reassert itself as a set of image practices that are radically distinct from the surface images that are being produced and proliferated through digital technologies.
To kind of claim some kind of authenticity or like human connection or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't think authenticity can be thought of as absolute in these terms. Obviously, photography contains a whole bunch of different subject positions and forms of subjectivity and kind of chance encounters and decisions. But what I think it can do is assert a claim to authenticity that is sort of rooted in a sense of relationality and relationality within and between human encounters. And that's something that AI, particularly AI, is incapable of doing. But to do that, like to make that claim stick, to help us look towards the photograph and the practices that sit behind the photograph as something that perhaps contains an element of authenticity or a claim to authenticity, really needs to rely on a greater sense of understanding of the image and image making practices, rather than just relying on the surface of the image to tell us everything that we need to know about how it was produced and what it's trying to say.
Well, there's a lot to go into there, Samid, but we may be out of time. But you are speaking at the closing event of this exhibition. I take it you knew Tim Page, a colleague. Do you want to just talk briefly about that exhibition and why you think people should check it out?
Absolutely. So sadly, I never actually met Tim. While I never got the chance to meet in person, what I've come to understand of him is someone who gave us an incredible view of the 20th century and certainly into the 21st, but tried to go beyond the standard narrative and visual language of 20th century conflict and insecurity and suffering, and really give us a grounded sense of how big picture politics played out in everyday life. And again, Miriam Deprez's essay delves into that a little bit. But the exhibition itself is this incredible collection drawn from an even bigger collection of photographs that Tim donated to Griffith University, with whom he had a long-standing connection. And I think the curation by Carrie McCarthy and Dr. Amy Karkik really speaks to the title of the exhibition, The Very Edge of the Brightest Light. All of Tim's photographs really give us a peek into the border spaces and the boundary spaces and the liminal spaces, those edges of shadow in big events throughout the 20th and 21st century.
On 4ZZZ, The Paradigm Shift is a show. We were speaking to Samid Suliman about photojournalism and its role in making a better world. Samid is a theoretician rather than a practitioner, but I have on the phone with me now a practitioner of photojournalism for a better world, Barat Ali Batoor. How are you, Barat?
I'm good, thank you, Andy. How are you?
Very good, and glad to have you on the show. We have been talking about photojournalism for a better world, and I guess to start off with, can I ask you, what role do you think photojournalism has in trying to create a fairer and a better world?
Thank you so much, Andy, for having me in your show. Photojournalism or visual journalism is a very powerful medium, because looking at things like showing pictures and visuals for using different stories is more reachable and believable for people, and that's why it has a big impact. And I think power of photojournalism has always been very unique and also important, and lots of histories and stories have been preserved through photos and photojournalism and storytelling. That's why this quote was famous, like a picture worth 1,000 words. So very universal and very unique in its own way.
Could you tell us about your own practice of photography and film and how you've tried to tell stories doing that?
Sure. I am an accidental photographer, to be honest. I mean, I wanted to become an actor or model when I was growing up, but I accidentally came into this profession, and I found it very impressing. And then also coming from a background where we never really had a chance to tell our stories, and I thought this is the thing that I would like to do, and that's how I would like to tell my stories. So I am kind of a self-taught photographer initially, and then in 2000, I started in 2002, and in 2009, I was invited to join a master class where I met Tim Page in Kabul. And from there, so I learned more about the industry and profession. And then, I've been working with different outlets and magazines as a freelancer for a long time. I got published on Newsweek, New York Times, Washington Post, and worked on different stories. Like I have always been, mostly have been interested in social issues, issues impacting people and who really did not have means of telling their own stories, or just basically I should say that stories around myself, like my community, my people, and people around me.
And so you've made a documentary film that depicted your own refugee journey. How was the process of making that?
So, as I said, I had been focused more about the issues around myself, my community and my people. When I published the story of sexual abuse of children, the Dancing Boys of Afghanistan, it got published on the front page of Washington Post. I had to, then people in power who were involved in this practice got upset, and they started threatening me, and they were after me. So I had to leave Afghanistan overnight. Then I became a displaced person, so I was on the run, and I decided that I will document my journey while I'm on the run. And then I found people smugglers and traveled through different countries, and I documented my journey and also what was happening to my people, because at that time, targeted killings of my people in Pakistan was also at its peak. People were getting killed almost every day, and I documented the stories of Hazaras in Quetta at that time, and then a lot of people, they were leaving Pakistan to get to safety, and I also found someone to get me out of that country, and through Southeast Asia, I traveled with people smugglers, with other Hazaras. I photographed at every step of my journey and filmed it, and got to Indonesia. In Indonesia, there were many refugees, and I kept documenting their daily lives, what they were doing and what is happening, until I found a people smuggler who who said will take me to Australia. So getting my cameras with me on board was very difficult. So I had to make a deal with them, and finally I could, and I got on a boat with 92 other people to travel to Christmas Island. But unfortunately, on the second night, our boat leaked and water was coming, and one of the motor pumps stopped. So our boat was sinking, and I kept documenting the journey and what was happening at that time. So luckily we survived after struggle of 8 hours, and but my camera fell in the water and it was destroyed. So I was so upset and sad that whatever I documented got lost. After spending 2 nights on the beach, we were arrested by Indonesian water police, and then we were taken to a detention center. I escaped from there, and then in Jakarta, I found out that my memory card survived. So that is, the rest is history.
You really have to be very committed to the art to keep doing that in no matter what circumstances, to still be thinking about what's the best shot, how do I frame this, all these, how do I protect the memory card and the camera and things like that. Does it require a real dedication to it, and how does that balance with the fact that you're in a difficult situation and you're thinking about a future film? It
does require dedication, and also I think that really helped me overcome my fear as well, because at that time when everyone was so scared, so afraid of dying in the sea, that helped me distract my attention and focus from that fear to what I was documenting, how to get my frames right, how to get my exposure correctly, and seeing and witnessing expressions of people. It was very difficult for me, for myself. I couldn't ignore it, but at least maybe very minimal, it was helping me to distract my from my fears. It does require a lot of effort, and it does require a lot of dedication. But I thought it was over at that time. Now, after 10, 11 years, those memories are fresh, and I think it comes back to us, and the toll and the trauma is very heavy sometimes. So photojournalism is a difficult trait, and photojournalists, they take a lot of risks. They take a lot of responsibilities on them to tell stories, to visualize things for the world, for the people to see. Either it is from war zones or difficult human tragedies happening around the world.
In your work, telling stories that people in power aren't always very happy to hear, and you're crossing borders and things like that, do you have techniques for kind of smuggling your memory cards and cameras and things like that? Is that part of the practice of a photojournalism who's really critiquing power?
You're right. I mean, people who are in power, they are not happy, or they don't like people like myself or others who dare to tell stories that are unpleasant for them. I don't know if there are, for some people, there might be some trainings and things, but as I said, I was a self-taught, when I started. When you are in those situations, really you make your own kind of, you use your own sense, what to do, what not to do, and some things happen. A lot of time, things happen that to be in your favor, and sometimes it can work against you. But smuggling cameras and memory cards, they were all just happened in a way. And for instance, when we were caught in Indonesia at the detention center, Indonesian authorities, they strip searched everyone. They asked everyone to take their clothes off, and everyone was with their underwears only, and they checked everything, body search, and they took our shoes, money, and any electronic device. But in that moment, for some miraculous reason, they did not touch my bag where my cameras were. They checked everything, and I was hoping they don't touch, they don't catch my camera. But luckily they didn't touch my bag, and they just after finishing others. And then without touching my bag, they left the room. And it was meant to happen like that. Even that failure of my trip, when I reflect, it was meant to be that way. So for instance, if I reached Australia, so the immigration or Department of Home Affairs could have confiscated that memory cards, because they didn't want refugee stories to come out. So maybe that was meant that we had to go back, and these photos should see the light of the day, and people should know about these stories, why people flee and what do they go through. Because unfortunately in Australia, refugee stories and stories of people seeking asylum were extremely politicized, and it lost really its human face, and it just became political football rather than a humanitarian issue that we should be playing our roles here. So I think my photos really helped bring that discussion to life, and also put some perspective, human face to the story, and real tragedy happening, unfolding in these countries, and where we are lacking to play our responsibilities.
Now, the last question I want to ask you is about, I guess, as a Hazara, a person, many have been refugees, persecuted, and I guess often in kind of conflict photojournalism, Hazaras or other people from Afghanistan are the subjects of the photos more often than they are the photographer or the person with the power to distribute it. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about that experience for Hazara, who are on the other side of the camera lens. What are the complexities of photojournalism for your people?
That's a very good question. Especially for the Hazaras, I don't know, if your audience know about this, but Hazaras are the most persecuted ethnic group in Afghanistan and one of the most persecuted ethnic groups in the world. And we have been deprived of education and white-collar jobs in Afghanistan, and also our history have been manipulated by the rulers, and also we never really had a say in the history and also in telling our own stories. So probably I could say I am maybe one of the first ones in our in the history, in the last 100 and 140 years of history of Hazaras, since we have the Hazaras have been oppressed and persecuted by the rulers in Afghanistan. So we are telling our stories. It is a great responsibility, and I think a very much needed as well. And also it feels because we see that our stories are always neglected and are not correctly told. So that is why I felt when I picked up the camera, I said, this is what I need to do. This is what I have to do to tell our stories to the world. And I think we should be telling our own stories. We should own our stories. Then we can correct the history, and then we can tell the real and honest stories.
All right. Thanks very much, Barat, for speaking to us.
Thank you so much, Andy, for having me.
That is Barat Ali Batoor, award-winning photographer, filmmaker and educator. It's an interesting field. We're in an interesting time where, as we have said, there's so many photos and so many little grabs of content, and how do we get these images to cut through and translate into, as Barat said, the humanizing of stories, but as others have said, into action and the kind of action that can create change. It is a difficult question, which we have addressed from different angles, but I think we would all agree that we are better off for having these images that people have worked so hard and often risked so much to share with the world. And so there certainly is a power in documenting. And of course, independent media, for Triple Z, we don't do many photos on the radio waves, of course, but it is, again, a way of trying to get the stories that need to be told out there. And in a situation of highly controlled media environments and digital algorithms, we need this independent media, whether it's with cameras or with microphones, to be out there telling the stories that the underside of power. That's all we have time for. See you next week.